It's 11 o'clock. We'll get started. I'm sure there'll be one or two more people joining us along the way. My name is Eric Story from the Edmonton Pride Seniors Group. It's May 5th, and thank you all for attending our weekly Aging with Pride discussion group for 2S LGBTQ plus seniors and allies. Thank you too for our partners, SAGE and the Pride Center of Edmonton. Before I introduce the speakers, I must acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada whose presence continues to enrich our lives. Two quick housekeeping items. First, let you know that this session is going to be recorded for future use on our YouTube channel. If you don't wish your image to be recorded, please close your video feed. And secondly, I'd like to remind you the code of conduct that was outlined in your Zoom invitation and underscore a couple of points. The first, please respect our speakers by remaining muted during the talk. We will unmute you for the Q&A. Be mindful of time limitations and keep your questions and comments as brief as possible so everyone can participate. Everyone who wishes to will be given an opportunity to ask a question before individuals who have already spoken will be recognized. And last, please respect the confidentiality of personal information. Wow. Okay, so today we're really happy to have three very distinguished members of our community. Dr. Michelle Lavoie is a lesbian queer artist, curator, writer, researcher, and instructor. Michelle works with storytelling and art making to show and tell 2S LGBTQ community stories. Her doctoral research focused on finding new ways to mentor youth and young adults through art practice. Michelle's community work began in the early 90s when she created 2S LGBTQ film festivals, Voice and Vision, and Speaking in Tongues. More recently, she created the Edmonton Queer History Project's We Are Here exhibition at the Art Gallery of Alberta and Reimagining Normal exhibition, which featured EQHP and artwork and stories emerging and established 2S LGBTQ artists. Reimagining Normal traveled to 20 plus schools, libraries, and community centers in rural Alberta from 2018 to 2020, hosting over 50,000 viewers. Darrin Hagen is an award-winning playwright, author, composer, and queer historian whose plays have been produced across Canada, in the US, and Europe. Since the Edmonton Queen, he has created art that is a unique window into gender and history. He has been artistic director of Guys in Disguise since 1987, has received 7 Sterling Awards for his work in Edmonton theatre. Other plays include Tornado Magnet, my personal favorite, Bitch Slap, Witch Hunt, At the Strand, Buddy, and the Empress and the Prime Minister, and Metronome. He has been named one of the 25 most influential Alberta artists in the past 25 years. Dr. Kristopher Wells is an associate professor and the Canada Research Chair for the Public Understanding of Sexual and Gender Minority Youth at MacEwan University. His scholarly work specializes in 2S LGBTQ youth, health, education, sport, and culture. Currently, Dr. Wells helps coordinate the Edmonton Queer History Project, which is focused on documenting and sharing stories about the people, places, and moments that make Edmonton's queer history. Sorry for the length, but you know, everybody in the community knows these three people, knows what fantastic work they've done in the community. So that was the briefest possible introduction. I will let you three go ahead, please.
Thanks, Eric. We appreciate not only the introductions, but the invitation to be able to speak with you today. So as was mentioned, my name's Kris Wells. My pronouns are he, him. We're fortunate to have 3 members of our project team joining us. So you heard Michelle and Darrin's biographies, but we also want to recognize one of your own, Michael Fair, as an integral part of our project team. So we're thrilled. Thank you, Michael, for joining us and doing double duty today. We want to invite you into the conversation as well. So what we thought we would do is share a little bit of the history and the background of the project, and show you better than telling you, show you our website and walk you through what we've created to help, as Eric described, help document, commemorate, celebrate the people, places, and moments that have helped to shape and define Edmonton's not only queer community, but the city of Edmonton as well. And we're hoping to bring through our project many of these invisible or hidden or lesser known stories to the forefront as important contributions to building our city and our community. And we know many of you on this call are history makers and knowledge holders. So we're really excited to have this discussion with you, to learn from you, and to get your ideas on how our project can continue to grow. So as was mentioned a little bit in Michelle's brief bio, this project started back in 2015 as part of the Edmonton Pride Festival's 35th anniversary celebrations of Pride in Edmonton. It's a little contentious as to when Pride actually started in Edmonton. So through the Pride Festival, we landed actually on 1980 as the the early informal attempts of Pride gatherings at what some of you may remember as being Camp Harris, which was basically a weekend getaway. And from there in 1982, the formal Pride, as we might know it, being more organized by a series of community groups, hosting specifically named Pride events started. So sometimes when you hear about the anniversary of Pride, you might see some different dates, and that's why it's, as you know, it's hard to find information from so long ago that was documented, because much of this information wasn't documented by the mainstream media or in an official record. So we've had to piece it together from people's personal records, their memories, their experiences, and what we could find through personal and museum archives. So what you'll learn through some of this conversation is that history is often contested. There are multiple versions, and we like to show how we landed on one particular version of the history by carefully documenting our sources, and to leave that archival trail for future work, future researchers to be able to pick up on, to begin to build a community archive of this information that we've been able to piece together, and to continue to share and preserve and protect for generations to come. So that back in 2015, that initial exhibition that was mounted, and Michelle was part of that original project team and was the curator of that exhibit, that some of you might remember was featured at the Art Gallery of Alberta. And there was an opening panel that was recorded and available on our website if you want to jog your memory about that. And that was really, for us, we did some life history interviews that we were able to document and record, and that was very important too, because unfortunately some of those members have now passed on, and really important to preserve their contributions in their own words. So a big part of our project is also doing this life history work, and as we're doing the interviews, we also want to make this work public, to be able to share it as well. So we created a series of videos, interactive displays through art collections. Michelle created many collages and exhibits that were framed and hung in the gallery. So it was very much a multimedia exhibit. So our project really continues to build forward from that. And you heard pieces of that project also traveled around to rural Alberta, to young people, into schools and communities, which was really important, because we know many of them don't have access to the same resources or knowledge or supports that we're fortunate to have in places like Edmonton or Calgary or Lethbridge, that have community centers or pride organizations. So getting this information out to young people and out in rural communities is critically important. And we know, quite frankly, that LGBTQ issues are still not part of Alberta's K-12 curriculum. We've been written out of history, and our identities and our communities have been silenced. And so if you're a young person, it's very hard to learn about this history and this knowledge and these stories and have your own sense of community and connection. I know we've heard from many people that you might have felt like you were the only one growing up because you weren't represented in your textbooks or even in the past and positively in media or in news stories or films or things like that. So this visibility is really important, and we believe it's really important to share these histories as appropriate with young people as well. So our project moved forward, and really we decided to revisit the Edmonton Queer History Project when the pandemic hit, as a way to put people to work, and particularly to get some money out to artists who we know were particularly struggling during the pandemic. And we were able to hire designers, we were able to hire writers, community members, students, whether it's composing the theme song for our podcast, to Darrin hosting the podcast, to people doing research around our particular histories, to graphic designers, to you name it. That was a good moment too, where people had some time and interest to join the project with that. So what we settled on was starting in the downtown. We know that that's often where queer communities are often most visible, is in the heart of their downtown communities all over the world. And we started to think about what were other cities doing? What did other community history projects look like? We knew that there was some great work happening in Calgary with Kevin Alderson in particular, and the Calgary Gay History Project, and work that was happening in Vancouver, where they were looking at commemorating particular sites of queer history in their city, and of course the National Archives that are in Toronto. And we thought about, what could we do here in Edmonton? And Michael had a copy of the Calgary map that they did of their downtown, and challenged us to say that, well, we can do everything better than Calgary can do. So we looked at that and we said, well, why don't we do a map? And we literally started to think about, brainstorm all of the places where queer history has happened downtown. And we started to create a list. And then we drew a big circle around where could one reasonably walk in the downtown. And that's how we sort of ended up on our 27 sites that are part of our queer history map. This is the map, what it looks like in paper copies, and we wanted it to be colorful, and we wanted the map itself to be a piece of art. And I'm still old school, where I like to hold things, physical copies. Michael's got his map, and so you can see the map. We had our local artist Jason Blauer design the map. He's done many murals and projects across the city, and we wanted the map itself to be a piece of art, and the opportunity to do self-guided walking tours. So we have 2 walking tours that we've identified, and on the back of the map are little descriptions. We call these teasers or highlights about the location, and then on the website we go into the deep dive into the histories, the written histories of the website. So that's really what I'll start with is sharing my screen, and we'll start with a little video that we did as an introduction to the project, and then we'll walk you through the website, and then I'm going to turn it over to Michelle and Darrin to share some of their perspectives, highlights, favorite maybe stories or locations on the map, and Michael as well. And then we'll just really open it up for questions for a conversation. So technology willing, here we go. All right, everybody can see the map. Okay, so far so good. And I'm just going to click our project here.
When you think about queer history, what images come to mind? Do you immediately think about the Stonewall riots, pride parades, the devastating impact of the HIV/AIDS epidemic? Or maybe you recall the protests for human rights and equality, like the fight to legalize same-sex marriage. These are all monumental moments in queer history. But what about the queer history that's happened in our own community? The Edmonton Queer History Project exists to educate not only the 2S LGBTQ+ community, but everyone about Edmonton's vibrant and storied queer history. One notable story of Edmonton's queer history centers on the remarkable Michael Fair, who began his journey to activism when he was arrested with over 50 men as part of the Pisces Health Spa raid in 1981. Michael fought back through the courts and ended up winning his case, while others had their lives ruined forever. Michael went on to become an influential community activist and became Alberta's first openly gay politician when he was elected to Edmonton City Council in 1992. Michael's courageous advocacy throughout the years led to the creation of many important community organizations that still operate today, including HIV Edmonton and the Edmonton Arts Council. As a result of his tireless community advocacy, Michael has been recognized by having a local city park and a junior high school named in his honor. Another influential story of Edmonton's queer history revolves around Darrin Hagen, an instructor at King's College who was fired due to his sexual orientation in 1991. Darrin took his wrongful dismissal to court, and after 7 hard-fought years, his case was heard before the Supreme Court of Canada, and he won. His landmark case set the precedence for the inclusion of sexual orientation in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which led to the new protections being included in Alberta's Human Rights Act. Edmonton is full of queer history. Do you know about Women's Space, which held dances, campouts, and events that helped to connect Edmonton's lesbian community together? Or how about E2S, the Edmonton Two-Spirit Society, which began in 2001 to promote ceremony, healing, connection, and recognition for Two-Spirit communities within all aspects of society. These are only a few of the numerous notable stories and moments that have helped to shape and define Edmonton's queer history. Queer history and queer people have always existed in Edmonton. You just need to know where to look. Through the Edmonton Queer History Project, we have researched and developed a queer history map, downtown walking tours, an interactive multimedia website filled with images and stories, and a new podcast, all designed to help make Edmonton's invisible queer history visible and accessible. Look and listen. You'll find and unearth stories about queer people from the past and present, and how these inspiring leaders have helped to bring forth local and national change. As queer youth continue to dare to be themselves authentically and unapologetically, it's important for them and everyone to remember the monumental movements and moments that have helped support them to thrive and be visible and vocal today. We invite you to join us in discovering the people, places, and moments that have helped to shape and influence Edmonton's queer history. We're here, we're queer, and we are everywhere. Help us document and share this important history.
That video was created by Jap Karan, one of our project team members, who's an undergraduate student at MacEwan, and he's a TikTok star. So he really helps us get this information out to the younger generations as well. And you can see he's very, very talented to be able to take all of the photos and information in our archives and on our website and put it together in a short little video. So we're very fortunate to have a diverse and talented team. And as the video mentioned, our website is really centered around our map. And so on the map, you can see the 27 locations that are identified. And you can go and, for example, click on each of the locations. So here we have Michael Fair Park, and is a write-up, and under each write-up is the full write-up that goes into the detailed history of the particular location. And then you can download a PDF version. So the PDF version actually has all of the footnotes and references. So all of the sources that we use to collect the information as well. So we wanted that to be available for people who wanted to see how we came to our conclusions. And then below each entry is a series of photographs that have been curated from our archive and donations people have made to us to explore some of the history. And then under the photographs are further links. So if you wanted to take a deep dive, or links to maybe other articles or videos that feature that location, or in this case feature Michael, we've sort of created a clearinghouse. So we want it to be a portal, not just for the information that we've created, but for relevant existing information that might be out there in the community as well. So we're always looking for people to recommend links for us to be able to add to our website. And so that is an example for all of the different locations. So we can go to Club 70, which was, for example, Edmonton's first gay bar that was created in late 1969 and formally established in 1970. And same thing, you'll get a detailed history, you'll get access to the PDF, photos, sometimes they're photos of the current location, or where we could find photos that speak to the experience. So you can see their old Club 70 newsletters, there are posters here, there's an original membership card, and all of these items are in our archive or available through various archives as well. And then again, connection to some of the different links. So the map as well, we printed the physical copies of the map that we've shown you, and we've made those available for distribution throughout the city. So every branch of the Edmonton Public Library, for example, is carrying the maps. The Art Gallery of Alberta, many of the locations on our own map are carrying physical copies of the map, like Audrey's Books, for example, the Citadel Theatre. For me, it was always great to have the maps available at the Edmonton International Airport. For that, when we have visitors who come to our city, that they're also going to have the opportunity to learn about our queer community, our queer history, as part of what we believe is important to share with visitors in the city of Edmonton. Also on our website is our Pride timeline. And so the timeline goes back from year, so back from 1980, talking about some of the highlights that happened in that particular year, where we could find photos or images. So you can see here in 1982, there's one of the very first posters that was created to celebrate Pride. It was called Gay Pride Week or Unity Week. There's a ticket to one of the early dances that was held by the Roughnecks, which was one of the first sporting organizations within the gay and lesbian community at the time. So, you know, $1 highballs certainly is dating the period. $5 to get in, and we go all the way up to present time. So all the way up to 2021 to talk about Pride, some of the controversies, the battle, for example, with City Hall to have Gay Pride Week officially proclaimed. That didn't happen until Jan Reimer became mayor. And Michael, of course, from his time on city council, was very involved and instrumental in many of those discussions and supporting our community and moving it forward. And then what we have, the third component is the podcast. And so the podcast is called From Here to Queer. And the podcast is really about featuring the people. When we talk about the people, places, and the moments, to make those voices and those stories come alive, and to present the history in a different format. So we know that some people will be more interested in listening to some of the history. Others will be interested in reading. Others will be interested in going through the visual photographs, like a photo album. And so, of course, the first episode of the podcast starts at Michael Fair's kitchen table, where so much of our LGBTQ history was made. In fact, we've told Michael he's never allowed to sell that kitchen table because it's going to go straight into a museum, as it should. Because if that table could talk, the stories it would tell. And so we were very fortunate to be able to, Darrin and our sound designer, Dave Clark, to sit down with Michael. And it's really powerful to hear people speak about our history in their own words. And we're going to launch the second episode in June for Pride Month with a very special guest, and we'll be announcing that soon. And we continue to do interviews and invite suggestions on who you'd like to hear on a podcast. And so, our only requirement is that it's focused on Edmonton and focused on the stories from Edmonton's queer history. So on the other parts of the website, we have a resource section. So, for example, the recorded conversation, the panel discussion we had back in 2015 is recorded. Dr. Lauren Warnicki was part of that, unfortunately, who's since passed away, along with Tina Taylor and Dr. Reverend Charles Bidwell were some of the panelists, with Murray Billett, and Michael was the MC of that. And then we have some of the videos that were part of that initial 2015 exhibition archived on our website as well. So we wanted to make sure that we were also preserving and sharing some of the history that we've made through the project, and that our whole goal has been about making this history publicly accessible and making it accessible for free and in a variety of different formats. And then on our news and events page, this is where we're listing our different happenings, the media that is centered around our project. We've been fortunate to have been featured in some exciting places, including Forbes magazine as one of the 22 best places to travel around the world. And the Queer History Project was chosen for Alberta as a must-do cultural activity. And we had another feature in the Globe and Mail recently that talked about the project. And here we also are posting our events. So we have a sold out talk coming with Michael and Darrin as part of Edmonton's Jane's Walk this Sunday, in fact. And we are planning to host guided walking tours and bus tours in June, July, and August in partnership with the Edmonton Downtown Business Association. So all of this work has been made possible thanks to the generosity of important funders, including the Stollery Charitable Foundation, the Edmonton Heritage Council, and our center at MacEwan, the MacEwan Center for Sexual and Gender Diversity, and the Canada Research Chair that I hold has been able to help fund some of the researchers and the students and who've been involved in the project in doing the archival research and the writing. And we've had great support from the Edmonton Police Service that have allowed us access to historical records, the Provincial Court of Alberta that's given us unprecedented access to files, for example, from the Pisces Health Spa raid that many might remember from 1981, which we believe, interesting fact that we found out, we believe the Pisces Health Spa raid that involved the arrest of 60 plus LGBTQ Edmontonians was the largest mass arrest in Alberta's history. And we continue to dig through the archives to do further research on that project in particular. As we like to say with Darrin has done some extensive writing on that soon we'll have enough for a book, just probably on that topic itself. There are so many important stories to be shared and to document what was a very pivotal part of raising the consciousness of Edmonton's LGBT community, and in many ways represents one of the first times the community organized and galvanized and fought back against police and state oppression, and really started to launch and provide a pathway for community organizing on so many other issues that would come, shortly after we were in the midst of the HIV/AIDS crisis. And we know how important community organizing and support was for that. And so, of course, with HIV Edmonton and the AIDS network of Edmonton are an important part of this history, and we've made sure to represent them on one of the stops on our location. So what I'll do here is I'm just going to stop and invite Darrin, Michael, and Michelle to share some of their thoughts and reflections as well. So what I wanted to do was give you a broad overview of the project, a little bit about the history of the project and where we are now. And we'll also talk about where we see the project headed next. So I will stop and turn the floor over. Michelle, Darrin, Michael.
Sure. Maybe I'll just mention a few of the highlights. For me, there were so many. I actually made some notes, so I might have to grab my glasses. So I think one of the main things that comes to mind, I'm just going to mention a few just kind of briefly, and then I invite questions like later on about it, because there's really so much I could go into. But working with Edmonton Two-Spirit Society was a really amazing, wonderful learning opportunity for me. And they were so generous working with Cheyenne and Rob Gurney from Two-Spirit Society. And they, you know, how they shared their stories, and Rob shared very personal stories with us about his life. And you know, before Two-Spirit identity was really named, you know, and coming to a place where that was finally named in the early 1990s, and then how he was introduced to the Two-Spirit Society. And then he really felt this sense of belonging and that knowing identity. And it was just such an amazing story. And Cheyenne as well, just talking about, you know, we're all sort of finding our way and finding our teachings. And it was really, it was so, I just felt very, very honored by their stories and by their learning and by their generosity in the sharing and learning alongside them. And you know, the teaching of Cree 8 genders, you know, was very, very interesting to me, being somebody who's more androgynous, and that being sort of one of their genders. I thought that was so interesting. So I just want to touch upon that first of all, and also how we used OCAP principles, which is ownership, control, access. I forget the last thing, but you know, basically I recorded the interview I did with Rob and Cheyenne, and then it was gifted to Edmonton Two-Spirit Society for their exclusive use and for their archives, because that's what they wanted. And just working back and forth, I just want you to know, like, because I was doing the research and writing alongside Two-Spirit Society for that write-up, and just that how we co-developed it. I would write, it would go back and forth to them, they would give feedback, you know, and a couple months before it was going online, I got in touch with them again to say, hey, you know, are you still okay with everything? And how, you know, some stories were changed at that point, a lot of feedback, and Rob actually did some editing, right? And so that very much a working together and co-developing. So that was a really interesting, beneficial process. I'm just going to mention a couple other, just briefly, because there's so much to talk about, and I'd rather get into questions. But the stories of Imrie and Walbridge were so amazing, about 2 women architects, being a lesbian queer person myself, and just, you know, it's so invisible. It's so invisible. And those stories are still so invisible, right? A book was recently written, and I guess the person who's researching was saying she didn't know they were, you know, a lesbian couple, right? And so, I mean, they met in the late 40s, early 50s, I think it was early 50s, in school. And then they developed their own architectural firm, and very successful. I mean, because they're women, they only did residential places mostly, but you know, their life and their travel and their love and how it all came together, just such a beautiful story, and just so totally invisible, right? And how we found it and brought that to light and highlight that is just really, for me, like really heartwarming personal story, and beautiful. Woman Space was really interesting for me. I worked on that as well. And that was just a really, I mean, I came out in the early 1990s in Edmonton, coming from Ontario, here to do grad school. And yeah, I went to a few women's dances at Women's Space, but I had no idea of all the things that, you know, I read a couple of the newsletters, but I had no idea of all the things that they did, and also sort of the politics, and that wasn't always, you know, easy, right? And I think that's really important for us nowadays as well, to realize that it's not all one homogenous story. It's not one linear progress narrative. There's always going to be counter stories and challenges, and and how we navigate that is so important. Looking at the gala documents, and the papers, and seeing gay and lesbian awareness that developed in the 1980s, Liz Messiah and Michael Fair and Maureen Irwin, fighting for all kinds of rights, and really fighting, and the resilience that was there. And we need that too. And so seeing that kind of solidarity as well as difference, I think the two together are so important nowadays. I mean, look at Roe v. Wade in the States. Look at the craziness going on in Florida, where kids can't be gay in school, or it's just, there's a lot of craziness happening. And I think I really see the need for both. The ability for us to have counter stories, and for us, trans communities have their own stories, and women's communities have their own stories, and gay men that have their own, and so but all these stories, the separate and also bringing them together in terms of in terms of that solidarity. And that's why I think something like this project is so important, because when we wrote the grants different grant, to start to even think about a website happening, we thought about it being a hub, but a place for intergenerational conversation, where we can start to have these conversations, right, and start to see each other's stories and understand. And so I think that's why something like this is just so important as a touch point, as a pole like we're putting down, and as a sort of foundation for other places, and for academia and community to come together in really important ways. That's all I have to say for now, but you can ask me questions.
Darrin, would you like to take over?
Absolutely. Nicely done, Michelle and Kris. There's so many highlights. It's really hard to sort of narrow it down, but there's a few that jumped out at me as being really moments that I wanted to share with you. One of them was actually the recording of the podcast with Michael at that infamous dining room table. And I feel like the whole thing should just be a museum, like a walk-in museum that we can have for the rest of time, where you can walk in and see the table where everything started. The sound designer, Dave Clark, who was recording Michael and I, he's a straight artist, very familiar with the queer community in Edmonton, but not as familiar with the history. And so he actually commented after, as we were driving back, about how amazing it was to sit in the place where it all kind of took root, and it just reminded me what an important resource we have in people like Michael, where we can talk to first person accounts of what it was like. And Michael's story is actually 12 stories, so it's on the longer side for a podcast. But one of my favorite things is when I sent Michael the file so he could listen to it, he kept emailing me back going, I can't see anything. It's like, Michael, it's a podcast. There's no video. You have to just listen to it, which I thought was fun. But that was just a delight to be able to sort of sit and laugh and trade stories and cry a couple of times, because there's been a lot of that. I have to say, the queer history stuff isn't always fun to go through. So that was really inspiring, and just an experience that I won't soon forget. And there was so much history that we had to actually go back for another 2-hour interview. It took us 4 hours to get everything into some sort of narrative, because Michael has been involved in so many pivotal stories in queer history in Edmonton. Another one that Michael was involved in, but one that I sort of worked on separately, was the some of the Pisces work. Kris, as Kris mentioned, he's had gotten access to some never before released stuff, files and police reports and things like that involved with the Pisces raid. And I gotta say, your faith in our sort of system is really seriously shaken and challenged when you read what our elders have gone through, and at the hands of the state. And that was kind of riveting, because I knew a lot of the people involved. Pisces is important in my story, even though I wasn't there. It closed just before I got to Edmonton, but I remember moving into an Edmonton that was reeling from the Pisces scandal. And so to read about the actual events of that night, and to know that I had actually met a lot of those people as they were coping with that scandal and that challenge, was really amazing. And I think there was a really important thing that came out of that was the documentary that we put online with Theatre Network for the Works in Progress series, which I believe there's a link on the Pisces descriptor page, actually brought another, for 40 years, Michael Fair had been the only person who had actually spoken, the only eyewitness that had spoken about that night. And for the first, as far as the found-ins go, and for the first time ever, someone saw that documentary and actually stepped forward and contacted and reached us, and we got to interview another person who had a different version of events, which was really amazing to be able to sort of put another view on that evening. And since then, another person has come forward too that we haven't interviewed yet, but to be able to speak to some of the police that were actually there that night, that's just kind of mind-blowing, to speak to people that were there 40 years ago and how they view the actions of what they were, you know, just following orders back then, and how they view it now is really kind of an amazing thing to experience. I cried a lot on that one because the injustice is just so kind of shocking. The other thing that I wanted to say that was a moment of pure delight and joy, and oh my God, I've never laughed so hard in my life, was the filming of the drag races for the Fruit Loop virtual Pride. We were planning on so I talked to 3 of my guys in disguise actors and said, do you guys want to do bad drag on a Sunday afternoon? And we'll fake the drag races. And they said, sure. And we showed up and it was cold. It was actually snowing that day. It was so cold. And we were just going to film it because, of course, the flashback alley where the drag races used to be is now a parking lot and an entrance to the parkade. It's all fenced off. You can't get into it. But as we started to get ready to film, someone who lived there came out and went, hey, what are you guys doing? And we told him, and he said, oh, well, here, I'll let you in. And so we actually got to film the drag races episode on the exact spot where the drag races used to happen. And we recreated my favorite event, which is, wait for it, this is the title, the Foxy Lady Disco Dancing Lounge Rhinestone Turkey Baster Relay Marathon, which was my favorite event that I came up with in 1984, I think it was, where you had to take a rhinestone turkey baster and run around the Foxy Lady, which was like down to the corner, around, and then back up the alley. And so we actually did that with all 3 of the queens. Trevor Schmidt wiped out in a mud puddle. That's for real. You can see it, like it's not a stunt. And he actually has the wounds and the blood to prove it. We laughed so hard. It was like literally one of the funnest shooting days I've ever had in any kind of showbiz moment. And what an honor and a pleasure to be able to sort of recreate that. And the guy who lives where the drag room used to be, where we used to, party and smoke drugs and hang all of our dirty Value Village dresses back in the old days. He lives in the condo that was right there, and he actually let us in so we could see the building inside for the first time since Flashback left that building. And I got to tell you, there's a big, beautiful circular staircase that goes up to the 2nd floor, and it's right where the dance floor used to be. So there's something really cool about that too. Those are 3 moments that really stick out. But I got to say, just the whole thing, I don't think you realize how vast the history is. I remember the first queer history bus tour, which wasn't a bus at all. It was 3 carloads of lesbians and me without even a cell phone. And we just kind of drove around chronologically and looked at stuff. And I would point out the windows and we'd talk about it later. It was really hard to find any information at all. And when I look at the website and see how much detail there is and how many threads there are that just reach into every single aspect of Edmonton life, that's amazing to me, and so rewarding. And it sort of shows you that we're not actually doing a queer history of Edmonton, we're doing a history of Edmonton, the one that has never been written before. And I think that that's really exciting. One last thing, when I met the author who was just in town working on a new book about Imridge and Wallbridge and Imrie, she gave me the address of a bunch of buildings that had been designed by the 2 ladies, the architects. And one of them, of course, was not far from where I used to live. And it's buildings that I passed by every day for decades. And I was like, oh my God, I had no idea that housing complex was built by them. So to be able to fill in more spots, even with all these decades of research, to be able to sort of still be learning stuff is so exciting. So it's been a real honor in that way.
Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for our esteemed colleagues here? If not, I'd ask maybe Michael, would you like to throw in a couple of quick memories?
I wasn't going to add anything in because there's been enough stuff on that too. I might quickly say that I remember the drag races that Darrin talked about as well too, and I must say they were absolutely hilarious. They were such fun kind of thing that and those of us who were spectators had a wonderful time. And some of the terms that we used and called out at people, I wouldn't dare repeat anymore, kind of thing. And that, but it was all part of the raucous fun that took place. And I sometimes think it's significant to point out that there was a lot of things that took place that were actually quite fun, but also important in terms of being somewhat of a community. And those are some of those kinds of things that kind of bind people, or a sense of belonging to a community as such. The other I would just kind of suggest is that everything that, in my mind anyway, almost everything that took place was not just one or two people. It was, it was a number of people making things happen. Whatever we talk about, I mean, HIV/AIDS, it was 5 or 6 of us that started that and grew to 100, over time, and same with everything else, kind of thing, in that too. So I think that's the other part to realize, is that it's the journey has included thousands of people, kind of thing, in that, and I think that's also significant. I would also just add that in many ways, Edmonton has been quite a welcoming community in many kinds of ways. And I think some of the reason we've been fairly successful is that we've drawn upon some of the goodwill that's here in the city. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. I mean, certainly hearing this, so many stories and so much community building that everybody that's just a quick picture of the community building that's gone on for so many years here. Jan, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, I just wanted to give high praises to all of you who worked on this project. It looks so professional. It's just amazing what you've done here. It's very good. I did have a question. I was wondering if you had any discussions or opportunities to talk to Katie Lang and any of her involvement that she might have had as a lesbian in Edmonton.
Yeah, in fact, I've hand delivered Katie a map, and she was very excited and started to point to locations on the map and tell stories. And that's the beauty of having a map, right? Everybody's got these individual personalized, stories to be able to share, and just to have a resource that helps to generate that conversation and discussion. So we're hoping at some point to have her join the podcast as well. So that's a work in progress, but obviously a phenomenal story to share, coming from Consort, Alberta, and finding her way in the big city. And she still does come to Edmonton quite frequently. So we're fortunate to also have her as a patron of our new Center for Sexual and Gender Diversity at MacEwan, and she's very much still involved in supporting LGBTQ communities where she can.
So
I just have to say, if we actually do get Katie Lang as a guest on the podcast, the first half hour is going to have to be edited out, because it'll just be me gushing and crying. Just have to say that.
And I think that I'll just add that with Katie Lang, the bus tour would go past where she lived in or at least part of the time when she lived in Riverdale, and point out where she lived, and then some of the other women that were important at that same time also in Riverdale, which had quite a significant number of lesbians living in that part of the city, kind of thing, that which Katie was. And also my first time of knowing who Katie was way back in the days of the early 80s. During Klondike days, there was a festival downtown where different corners of downtown had groups performing. There was also the tea that went on. She and her band at that time, which was called, what were they called?
The Reclines, because she was the reincarnation.
Yes, we're in a corner in Rice Howard Way, And I was with a couple other folks, and they said, "Oh, you got to come and see this one. Look at and see this woman and what she does." And she was quite a young woman, of course, at that time. Went and she was fabulous. And I'll never forget watching her and the reclines on a corner in Rice Howard Way on that Sunday afternoon. I'm pretty sure it was a Sunday afternoon. It was just a hoot and having a wonderful time. So that was the first time I ever knew who she was.
That would be the promenade, right, Michael?
Yeah, yeah. But I think
Promenade was when they
called the
blocked
promenade.
off downtown.
Yeah, yeah.
But Michael just reminded me of again, how important the community is in this. I remember when we were doing the Queer History bus tour, and we were down in Riverdale talking about the Riverdale Community Hall, where Women's Space used to have either the dry lesbians or the wet lesbians had the events there. We can't quite remember which. There was a schism that year. And as we were driving out of the Riverdale, someone went, "Oh my God, Katie Lang used to live there." And then it became part of the tour for every successive year. And I think that's really important to remember, that everyone has their own memories to throw into this, and that not one person has written any of this stuff, because there's so many threads and so many points of view. So everybody has helped create the whole thing for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, Darrin, and Kris. Just absolutely amazing presentation. The website, which I've put the link to the website in the chat box here. Please go and have a look at it. It is amazing. The work that, everything is correctly researched. Thank you, Dr. Wells. Dr. Lavoie, proper research, properly archived. And this is pieces of memory that are so important. And the last piece, just in terms of community, we hear about how important it is to have examples in the community. I was professionally closeted and personally out, and I can remember going to the drag races and going to various other things and seeing, yes, there are people like me in the world. And yes, it's wonderful to see that other people can be out. I can't wait until the day that I can be out. So I think that it's a continuing legacy that we all have to think about what our actions are for future, for other people who are sort of questioning, hiding. And you people have done an absolutely wonderful job. Michael, do you have one last final comment for us?
Yeah, just real quickly, because I recognize, of course, that Larry Jewell is here. And just in terms of speaking about what people bring to the community, is when we were starting HIV/AIDS, and that Larry was very shortly after we started part of it. And of course, Larry has a medical background. None of us knew any of the medical people in the field, and he knew them all, kind of thing, in that too, that we needed to connect with. And he also understood the language of what was going on with the virus and that too. And Larry was certainly extremely prominent in the early days of HIV, and became the chair of the board very shortly after we got going, kind of thing, in that. So again, it speaks to the fact that so many were involved doing so much.
Yep.
Thanks.
Well, thank you again so much, everybody. And thanks to Kim for technical assistance on every session that we do. I'd like to invite everybody to come back next week when we have Laura from the Sage Seniors Association talking about elder abuse. Not a fun topic, but one that's really important. A lot of what I found, a lot of seniors don't recognize when abuse is occurring. So it's very important. Kris, one last quick thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little highlight as to where we're going next with the project. So we've had some great support, as mentioned, from not only the Edmonton Downtown Business Association to bring vibrancy to the downtown, but from the city of Edmonton, from the mayor's office on down to many city councilors. So we're working with the city to actually design and develop Edmonton Queer History plaques, place markers. So starting looking at the 27 locations downtown to be physical markers. So we're also thinking of perhaps working with the Edmonton Arts Council to make those markers pieces of art as well. So stay tuned on that. As you can imagine, it's no small feat to put a sign up somewhere on public property in the city of Edmonton. So we're involved in lots of different discussions with different city departments and groups but all have been unanimous in their support of wanting to make this happen. With that, we've had contact from many groups that have asked us to share information, to groups that say, can we get some maps to give out, including we were recently contacted by the Old Strathcona Business Association. And so they want a mapping project, a queer history told of White Avenue and area. And so we're busy developing an inventory there and working with them as per probably the next area that we're going to work on as part of our project, because queer history happens everywhere. It doesn't just happen in the downtown. And as part of this work, we've been developing what we call a Edmonton Queer History inventory. So of different buildings and places and moments and conferences, so that we're able to develop a list for future research as well. But just developing that inventory in of itself is important to capture some of the, the history of our community as well. So we've got many different projects on the go. We continue to apply to different funders to continue to support this work. But perhaps what has been the most wonderful outcome is all of the stories that we're receiving through the website of people saying, I've got donation to make, I've got a story to tell, will you come and I want to talk to you. That's just been wonderful. In fact, we were able to connect one family with who had been separated through adoption at birth with part of their family member's history through the project. And they weren't able to talk to that member because they had passed away. But we had information, we had photographs in our archive that we were able to share as well. And they were so deeply appreciative to be able to learn more from our project. So many countless stories like that. What I think we've really learned is there is a real hunger for this information. There's a real desire to contribute to our queer city building. And as Michael said, from our institutions in Edmonton and elsewhere that maybe haven't always been supportive, but are now recognizing the importance of this work and want to help preserve and participate in the sharing of the history. And for us, it's always about trying to make this publicly accessible in as many different formats as possible to preserve and to inspire. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Again, that history, everybody clean out your closets. No joke. If you got any information, send it along to them. Thank you again. So this has been absolutely wonderful. Everybody, please go to their website and have a look. It's remarkable. Please join us next week. We'll be sending out a quick survey in the next day or two. So please do respond. Let us know how we can improve future presentations. Thank you, everybody for being here. Really appreciate it. And take care.